Leah and Prince. Glad to have you guys joining us. All right.
So this is well, for those of you that have been here before, this is our first time trying to do this with Zoom, and we felt like the big advantage to Zoom, although Zoom is almost like a curse word after COVID for so many reasons, but we did feel like at least one of the advantages of Zoom is that we would be able to interact a little bit more than we did with the other format previously. So we'll see how this works, and if it gets too chaotic or whatever, we can maybe change it up a little bit. It looks like we have a pretty decent turnout tonight, so we're happy everybody to join us, and we'll
I think like the typical Zoom etiquette, keep your mic muted until you're ready to join in the conversation, just to eliminate any kind of background noises. But other than that, we all know how to use Zoom by now, right? So I'm sure you guys can figure this out.
For sure.
But our webinar theme this month was the good, bad, and ugly marriage advice. And so we wanted you guys to be able to share what you've experienced, what good advice maybe you've gotten, maybe what's some not so good advice. And again, we thought Zoom was a good way to use this or do this webinar with this theme so that we could maybe interact a little bit more, just so that we can hear y'all's voice.
Yeah, I'm curious as this conversation unfolds. I'm very curious what kind of advice you guys have gotten that's been helpful or not helpful, and more importantly, I also hopefully we can talk about maybe why that advice is maybe helpful or not helpful.
Right.
Some of it is probably unhelpful just on its face value, but in other cases there I think is a conversation to be had there about what makes advice good or bad, so to speak. So
yeah,
I wanted to start out with some advice that I hear a lot, especially in Bible classes, or in particular in classes aimed at teaching singles and young people what they should be looking for in a spouse. And on the surface, it sounds like great advice, but I do think it misses the mark on some level. And that is this advice that I hear a lot, that the purpose of marriage is to help each other get to heaven. And when I'm looking for a spouse, the spouse that I should be looking for is to find someone who will help me get to heaven.
Is this something that you guys have heard taught? I'm guessing we're not alone, right? I see heads nodding.
Okay. Yeah. So
yeah,
probably.
Which on the surface sounds.
Oh, sorry.
Good.
What's that, Brent?
What was that, Brent?
I said I've probably taught that before. I don't even know.
Oh, sure. And I've said the same thing.
Right.
Clearly, I've definitely said the same thing, and probably even told my kids that at some point.
Right. And because on the surface, I think that sounds right. And we understand maybe the heart behind why it is we're saying that. But like everything, let's dig into the deeper level of what is it that we're really saying when we say that.
And I would propose that I don't even think that the Bible, that's not something that the Bible really even teaches about marriage, at least as far as I can tell. And really, if we're looking at what is the purpose of marriage, and if that's really, I think, where this conversation has to start when we're talking about what is the purpose of marriage, what is the purpose of finding a spouse, and what kind of spouse should I be seeking. Clearly, I don't want to choose a spouse that's going to be a hindrance to help me achieve heaven and to be there with God. But the purpose of marriage is not about heaven. The purpose of marriage is about what I'm accomplishing in this life. Now, yes, part of what I'm accomplishing in this life is to ultimately live in eternity with God and with Christ. But the purpose of marriage, even as it's laid out in the very beginning in Genesis 1 and 2, is, as God states it, to be fruitful and multiply and to fill the earth. And so I think sometimes we take that so literally that it's been taught that, well, if you're not having a bunch of kids, then you're not fulfilling your purpose. And I'm not sure that's exactly what is meant there, although maybe that's part of it. But more importantly, what God is explaining there, what he's getting at with Adam and Eve there, is that they have been created in the image of God. And if they've been created in the image of God, their purpose is to fill the rest of the earth with his image. Now, yes, part of that is having little tiny image bearers running around in your house and raising them up. But maybe more importantly, it's how you are taking that image of God and filling the earth with your influence, and more importantly, with his image, with what reflecting his image into the earth. So, finding someone to help me get to heaven, hopefully that's something that you're already working on. Hopefully you have a whole bunch of people in your life that are helping you get to heaven. That's the purpose, and that's why we have a congregation. That's why we have a church family, is to have people there to help us in this journey. But I don't know. What do you guys think? Am I totally off on that? Is that actually maybe better advice than I think it is, or what? Or am I just being too contrary?
Matt being contrary, never. Feel free to chime in if you have a thought about that. It's fine if not.
I think it's a really simplistic way to say something that's probably a lot deeper in reality. So we just say, which we do a lot with the whole idea of going to heaven. It's kind of just like a simple way to say things that are probably maybe need to be thought out in a more complex way, like seeking first the kingdom of God, or what is it that we actually mean by that? I think might need to be thought out a little bit more.
Yeah.
Well, maybe part of it boils down to the fact that I just hate the phrase getting to heaven. Like it's, if I just do enough, then I can get into heaven, or God will let me into heaven, or that to me is maybe where it rubs me the wrong way mostly. But that's maybe another entirely different conversation. That's just, I think, bad theology. But I don't know. I'm not a theologian or even a preacher, so I'm probably talking out of my pay grade.
I agree. I think the purpose is to glorify God, and heaven is a result of that, because when you glorify God, then you are in harmony with him and you spend eternity with him. So that's
right.
our purpose, is to be one with him and to glorify him.
Yes.
Right. And to start seeing that a marriage that just survives, a marriage where we're both going to heaven, isn't one that glorifies God if that marriage is a marriage that we're full of total alienation. If we're not actually working on spreading the image of God and using our marriages to glorify him, are we doing what he had in mind with marriage?
I think that's a good point.
Yeah, I was going to say, maybe a little tongue in cheek, I help my wife get to heaven because she has so many trials to face every day.
That's right. She's going to get that special level, that tier level of heaven.
Good job, Tim. You're just presenting challenge after challenge. You're building her faith and her patience. Yeah, it's good. Good work there.
Probably on the more serious level, the thing that I kind of probably knew, that she loved teaching even when we were dating and stuff, and knew that drive to know things. And so from that perspective of Genesis 1:2, filling the earth with images of God, that she would help fulfill that mission with me, carry that message wherever we go. But I think that the aspect that's lost is that I haven't thought about what complexity is, that the way that we connect draws God's love draws people to them. And when people interact as we interact as a couple with others, if that love is there, that draws people in and they feel comfortable. Yeah. And so that's a lot of work. And that part, I don't think I've ever thought about or has been emphasized as part of that mission to fill the image of earth with God.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent.
Because it's not just words, it's that embodiment of God's love.
Yeah, great thought.
Love that.
Very good.
Hey,
All right, we have
a quick,
several.
Hey, let me interrupt real fast. Clayton,
Yeah.
he got kicked off because he lost power and they have severe
Oh, no.
thunderstorms. So he just wanted to let everyone know that.
Oh, no.
I knew he had a little one sitting beside him. I thought maybe that one needed some attention, but okay, well, we'll be praying that the severe thunderstorms are not bad. Wow.
Ooh.
So I was going to say is we have several bad marriage advice, good marriage advice things, but that we could go through, but we'd love to hear what, if you guys came with something in mind, jump in and share it for us.
I would say I was thinking like all the bad marriage advice I think I remember getting, I didn't realize was bad at the time, all came down to the sexual relationship. Like all of it was not good. Especially
that.
like never say no to your husband.
Oh, hey, that's on my list even.
That made Matt's list. Yeah.
That good. Let's talk about that. Because I think that is such a common piece of advice. And I think it comes from, some of you probably have listened to the podcast episodes that we did about the purity culture and some of those ideas. And I think even purity culture probably helped to emphasize a lot of those things. But I think that kind of teaching was prevalent in religious circles, maybe in popular society. It's been there for a long time.
Yeah.
That kind of idea, and somehow that was even taught as a biblical principle by taking 1 Corinthians 7 way out of context and using that in a wrong and weaponized kind of way. But I agree with you. That is definitely something that I have heard. That's something that I've read in a number of different, quote, Christian marriage books, that you should never say no to your spouse when it comes to sex. And I don't think that is the spirit even of 1 Corinthians 7. I don't think that's the spirit of any kind of intimate relationship. Because if you can't say no, then are you really ever saying yes? And what do we really, as a spouse, and even in terms of our relationship with God, he gives us the option to say no, doesn't he? There are ways in which we are ultimately dependent on him, but he gives us the option to say no because he wants us to say yes.
Right. And
so I think, Tim, as you were even alluding to earlier, he's trying to draw us in with love. And so if I know that my spouse has the option to say no, that I'm going to behave in a little bit different way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to pursue in a little bit of a different way. And it's also going to force real conversation, real conflict, real growth, because we're going to have to negotiate that. And that's the beauty of it. I was talking to, of all things, I was talking to my dad about this not that long ago, about 1 Corinthians 7 and the fact that there's clearly in 1 Corinthians 7 that there is an obligation placed on the sexual relationship being something that is regular. It is of regular occurrence, that we can't deprive one another. So that to me, that if there is separation and a pausing of the sexual relationship, that is something that is temporary, because the assumption is that it is something that should be regular. And the point that we were discussing there is that I think the reason for that, although obviously I can't know the mind of God entirely because he doesn't say exactly why he makes it this way, but the thought is, or at least our idea was, that the reason he makes it a regular part of the relationship is because it forces us to come together. And if I know that I am obligated to pursue that sexual relationship, it's going to force me to want to be with this other person on a regular basis. Yeah. That said, if there's no conversation, if it's just an assumption, if it's just, every time I feel the urge, then I get to have what I want, then there's no building of relationship. So, I think that's terrible advice to say that your spouse should never, that you should always have to comply with every whim and desire that your spouse has. I think that's ridiculous.
Right.
That leaves no agency for either one of you,
Right.
and it dehumanizes each of you.
Right. And I think we've said before, and I love that we have now been doing this long enough that we can look and tweak how we're saying things, right? Like we're just digging in deeper and figuring out better language to use. So we have said before, you can't say no, you can say later. And I think that the heart of that is still true, that if your spouse comes to you with a desire for sex, and the example that Matthew always uses, and you're in the aisle of Walmart, I have no idea why this man uses that example. Every time we're somewhere, he uses that. But anyhow, your spouse comes to you with a desire for sex, you can say, now's not a good time, but give me 24 hours and I'll work to be there mentally. Or you can say, okay, yeah, it can be a yes right now, but you're going to get like McDonald's level of sex, right? Like we're talking quick and get it done. Or give me a little bit more time and we could like go to Chili's, or wait for the weekend and we could go to a steakhouse. You see what I'm saying? So I think the whole point of it is, like Matt's saying, it should be about this relationship that draws us together, even the conversation of, are we or aren't we having sex?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, and I even kind of heard this kind of language in another context, but the idea that it doesn't have to be an automatic yes. Sometimes what a responder ought to say is, well, why don't you convince me? I'm open to the idea. Why don't you convince me? And I think that's,
I like that one.
I think that kind of language.
And every responder on the screen just went, oh, and you pursuers better be writing this down.
But I think that's a beautiful,
Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful way to talk about it.
Yeah. What do you think, Tiffany? Does that?
Yeah, I mean, as you were talking and being in your seminars and stuff, like the thing that struck me the most, and we did some counseling and stuff off and on. So she called it obligatory sex. And I was like, ooh, like when she gave it that name, and then with you all talking about intimacy, I was like, it just totally short circuits the whole thing. Like, I feel like our sexual relationship right now is a celebration of where our relationship is at, which is what it should be, not, you have to do this.
You just gave me goosebumps. That's beautiful. Yeah, that's good. All right. Anybody have another bad marriage advice or good? I know you do, Brent Moody. I'm gonna call you out. They're thinking.
I think I already gave you one of mine. So the best one, which about having peace in your marriage and not having conflict, and
Yes,
that sort of thing. I don't know if I know the exact lines that people said, but that was the idea, that you shouldn't argue, you shouldn't fight, you have to compromise, pick your battles. Maybe that's the right way to say it.
there you go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's
good.
Yeah.
And thank you. And that's on our list too, not surprisingly. I mean, haven't you sat in a Bible class and heard people say that you should never go to bed with unresolved conflicts?
Right. Don't let the sun go down on your anger. We've all been quoted that, and it's been directly applied to. Therefore, you cannot go to sleep if you are angry at your spouse.
Or maybe more, I've even heard it say you can't go to bed until you resolve your problems or resolve your issues.
Right.
As if that's even possible. I mean, we're going to have problems every day, all day. And I'm going to wake up tomorrow and we're going to have more problems because we're two different people. And I think even though it's maybe not stated in these words, the idea, I think that's being expressed in a lot of ways, is that arguments are a sign of a bad marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, if you've heard us speak long enough, that the thing that we we say over and over again is that we have to learn how to embrace conflict. And that's a foreign concept to a lot of people, especially newlyweds who have these stars in their eyes and they can't imagine ever having, a fight or an argument or a tiff about anything. But this idea of embracing conflict, not running from the conflict, sometimes even leaning into the conflict, because conflict is where we learn who each other is. Conflict is where we learn what the other person wants and needs. Conflict is where we get to know each other. Conflict is where intimacy is really born, and where intimacy has a place to grow.
Well, and when you view conflict that way, just when you have just that general principle within your marriage, then conflict becomes not me versus you, but us confronting this together.
Mm-hmm.
And so then when you have that mentality and the conflict bubbles up at 11 p.m., you can say to one another, I don't agree with you, and this is something we need to talk through.
Now,
but I love you, and I know we will talk through this, and I'm going to sleep now because the baby's going to be awake in an hour.
Well,
right?
Going to bed with unresolved conflict is different than going to bed angry.
Yes.
And I don't have to go to bed angry every time. And I shouldn't go to bed angry every time.
Right.
What I need to do is, before I turn the lights out, at the very least, even if we've been arguing for hours and hours, sometimes the best thing to do is to say, honey, I love you. We're going to get through this. We're going to figure this out. We're on the same team. We're going to talk about this again, and we're going to try to work this out. But right now it's time to go to bed, because nothing good is going to come from continuing to rehash the same thing over and over again, especially while we're tired.
Right.
So there's a difference. I can have conflict and even go to bed with conflict, but still not go to bed angry. And I think that's maybe where
some of us, the example is going to bed. Some of us is, I need to be fed before we talk more.
Are you reading
Wonder who
her
that could
lips,
be.
or how in the world did you know she just said that? That's hilarious.
I just was like, oh, this could be the other, not going to bed, but being hungry.
Yes.
I know my friend.
That's right. And sometimes you just need to take a break from the conversation, and there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that, as long as it's approached from the standpoint of, I love you. We're going to work through this. Now's not the best time to continue this conversation.
But if you're the one to pause the conversation, you've got to be the one to say, we're not going to talk about this now, but here's when we are going to talk about this. And I think all too often, this is where we fall short, because we pause the conversation, but then life happens and we never get back to dealing with it until that same conflict bubbles up again.
Right.
And so sometimes, we keep a shared note on our phone that's date night conversations. And I would love to tell you that all of those things that get added to date night conversation are these lovely, deep conversations we're going to have. But sometimes it is, you said this, and I feel this, and we're going to talk about this. And so sometimes that is the date night conversation in part.
Mm-hmm.
But you've got to be very intentional at getting back to that conversation. If it's a conversation you can't finish, come back to it. But again, come back to it with the mindset that conflict is not a sign that our marriage is broken. Our goal is not peace. Our goal is to learn more about each other. And if every time we face conflict, I don't spend my time thinking, how do I get my way? But instead think, what can I learn about him through this conflict? What am I being told more about him by seeing this conflict? How do I see this through his eyes in a way that helps me better understand where he's coming from?
Well, sometimes that's where a good night's sleep is. It helps me to,
or a full belly.
Helps get me out of my own head and helps me to be more objective, be more willing to see the whole picture from a more objective standpoint.
Yeah.
That's where sometimes that break is helpful.
Yeah.
I think Brent, you mentioned a key phrase, I think, which is something about picking your battles. Yeah, I think that's such a terrible idea. When we decide that only, I'm going to just try to ignore all these things that are driving me nuts, and I'm only going to choose the one that upsets me the most, then I'm letting all of these other things that are under the surface just fester resentment. And I'm never, by picking battles, I'm only dealing with those little things that are just on the surface, rather than the problems, that the real relationship dynamic that's really at the heart of all of these things that are bothering me. If and there's so many other layers. So again, it's about, I mean, I understand sometimes what people mean by picking your battles is, in the aisle of Walmart is not the best time to bring up all the things that are bothering you about your spouse. So yes, there are times when you only have the opportunity to deal with what's right in front of you. But if you mean by that, I'm only going to pick and choose what I am going to express to my spouse, how I'm really feeling, and I'm holding back all these feelings inside because I only want to deal with what's on the surface, then I'm never going to get deep enough to actually learn who I am and who my spouse is.
Right. Good stuff. I just remembered, see, Jacob and Stephanie are on here, and Stephanie commented on Covenant Club.
Yes.
When we first announced this webinar about books, and that sometimes books can be a source of bad marriage advice. But I think Stephanie's comment was even more from the standpoint of being handed a book without a relationship with a person. So, we think that the right answer is to give newlyweds books and books, this will solve your marriage problems before they've even started. But we have not opened ourselves up to being a source that they know we don't have a perfect marriage. Your goal isn't to have a perfect marriage, and we're here to walk together through this. I think, I don't know if Stephanie, if you want to put in the chat box there, if that's the correct way to sum up what you were saying. But what do y'all think about that?
I'm here.
Give it marriage advice.
I'm here. We just don't have a camera set up. But yeah, that's what I was
okay.
talking about. Just the relationship and not having even the idea that other people have issues when they're giving us advice.
Right. You're just given a book and you're like, oh, if I just read this book, then my marriage will be as perfect as everyone else's.
And then you read the book, and there may be good points in whatever book, but yet your marriage is not perfect. And I loved how you mentioned, Stephanie, that one of the best things you all did was walk through a marriage book together with another couple. Is that something you could say more about?
Yeah, it was just having that, I guess, first time to really sit down with different couples and see where everyone's coming from and be able to share advice on both sides.
Yeah.
And it made a big difference.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, isn't it just liberating to sit with other people and recognize that we all kind of have the same problems and we're all dealing with the same issues, and we've been hiding it for so long, and it's so liberating to just let that go.
I mean, Matt and I always have the best view when we do live events with you guys, because we get to see the looks on your faces of just, oh, I'm not the only one, and I love seeing a whole room full of people like breathing that sigh of relief. Like, yes, we have walked through that too, because there's so much power in that community. And so I think, Stephanie, you're right. We need to be careful that we're not just handing newlyweds books and not building relationships with people who are starting out in marriage, but even broader than that, like doing this, right? This is what Covenant Club is meant to be about, like living this together in community.
Anybody else want to share some good or bad marriage advice? How about this one? You need to strengthen your marriage and stay together for your kids. Is that good advice or bad advice?
I feel like this is a trick question.
A little bit, maybe.
I don't know if I have the full answer to that. And I don't know that the one thing that I always appreciated about my dad, he said my dad said my wife always comes before the kids, and put her above the kids. And which I think was one thing he got right. Didn't do that great, but I think at least stating that was correct.
I don't know. I see it both ways. I could argue both sides of that. Coming from, my parents were divorced, and my dad, well, they were both divorced at least two. My dad 3 times. So coming from a child and just knowing what it does to a child, I would, I'm obviously in the ball camp. Please do what you can to save your marriage. But then I'm also like my best friend, like what her brother went through, they probably should have separated sooner, right? Yeah, that's a yes, and you.
And I can sympathize with that. I can see both angles of that. My first reaction to that statement is that, well, and maybe both sides of it. The one side of it certainly is that there will be consequences for your kids if you have a divorce, if you get a divorce. Mm-hmm. There will be dramatic and terrible consequences for your kids. Mm-hmm. That said, I don't think that if the kids are your motivation, then you're never going to draw towards your spouse. You're going to be drawn towards your kids. Mm-hmm. And the only thing you're going to do for your spouse is just simply out of obligation, which is not going to get the job done. Right. There will never be the depth of love and connection and oneness with your spouse if your motivation is for your kids.
Right. And I think the heart of this advice is this idea that our marriages become centered around our kids. And we live in such a child-centric society right now, that's super easy to think, oh, that sounds good. Yes, we want to work together and raise these kids and raise them for the Lord, and we'll put them first, and we'll have time after they're gone to enjoy our marriage. And yet, our goal is to prioritize our marriage and see past this period of child raising. I mean, the time, Lord willing, the time in your marriage where you are busy raising children will be very small. Although when you're in the middle of it, it certainly does not feel that way.
Yes.
I mean, but
True.
Here we sit, our youngest just turned 15, and we've sent 3 already out into the world in varying ways, but they're on the path of flight. And it's like, what happened? Where did they go? But if we had spent these past 24 years just focused on them, where would we be?
And what would we have to look forward to?
Yeah. And that's why you see so many people divorce after so many years of marriage, because the kids are gone and they look at each other and realize we have nothing left. And so I think our challenge is, yes, recognize that your marriage has an incredible impact on your children, but where you will have the most impact for your children is when your children see you prioritize your marriage.
Yeah. And like just the way that's stated, it just takes God out of the picture, out of the equation altogether. Right. And that's not why, like you pointed out earlier, it's not why we got married. And to, Jen, what'd you just say? It clicked something else too. I was going to follow up with. Oh, well.
I don't know. I say it and then it's gone.
Yeah,
also, it's very close to my bedtime.
We'll have to go back to the recording.
Oh, no. We were talking about good advice. That's what it was. So some of the best advice we got was the best gift you can give to your kids is to work on your marriage and keep it strong.
Yes. And I think that's beautiful advice.
I agree with you. And so I would say to those people who want to stick it out for their kids, I would say the best thing you can do for your kids is to actually grow closer to each other
Mhm.
and to deprioritize where you put your kids in what's important in your lives and in your marriage, and how you do things in general.
And that's easy to say in a really theoretical way and hard to do in a daily life way,
Yeah.
right? Because it involves making daily decisions about how much time we are spending with and for the kids.
Mhm.
How many activities do we sign them up for that take us 20 different directions, 10 months out of the year, and goodness knows, I mean, we know that story, having raised 4 children, and even when each child just has one activity, you're like divided into 1,000 different pieces. And so it is super hard to be very intentional during the years that your kids are, younger and busy, but the busyness depends on you constantly getting them places and providing things. And I don't know what the magic formula to that is, other than to constantly be having conversations and be willing to reevaluate and live radically. I mean, there was a time period where we looked at each other and we said, I don't even know when the last time we had a full conversation was. And from there, that actually started a whole lot of changing in our family. And we spent an entire year that nobody did anything. Nobody was allowed to have any activity outside of our home. And what happened is that year, we drew closer together as a married couple first, but we actually drew closer together as a family. We recognized that actually providing for each kid what we think they need for their enrichment was harming them and our entire family. And so it was really a year of resetting. Now, we did get back into a very, very purposeful and small ways, having our kids be involved in various things. But, we had to make the decision to totally radically reevaluate things and basically wipe everything off the plate. And we spent that year, we spent once a week going and doing something as a family with our kids. And it was phenomenal.
We had so many more.
And they were like free things, like going to parks and, all sorts of stuff.
We just had so many more conversations because we weren't in time as a family, because we weren't running and separating here and there, and you take the kids this way and I'll take the other kids that way. And we did things more together.
And not that that's the magic formula for everybody.
Not that we're not prescribing that. We're just describing what we did that made a difference for us in just reevaluating. I think
ultimately, it has to be first and foremost about your marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, you'll hear Matt and I say 1,000 times that go on date nights. We know it's hard. We know it costs money. We know that babysitters are expensive, but go on date nights. If all you can do is an in-home date night, do an in-home date night. That still counts.
Well, and that's what I would say. I heard this recently. I can't remember. I don't know who to credit. They said the important thing is not going out. The important thing is going in, meaning whatever that is going to be, it doesn't have to be going to even going out of your house. It needs to be going into your relationship and having a designated time and setting aside that time, whatever that looks like, to go into your relationship on a weekly basis. We have the liberty to go out because all of our kids can take care of themselves and they can all wipe their own butts and feed themselves. So
Claire would die that you just said that. So
everyone would assume that if she's 15 years old, that is her level of accomplishment. But we have the opportunity. But I think most importantly, we use that time, because a lot of people go out every week on date nights and they never go in. They never actually have a meaningful conversation. We're not advocating for you to go out and go to a movie and just be distracted from each other. We're advocating that you take that time, whatever that time is, whatever that looks like in your life and in your circumstances, to go in and to get into your relationship. And that's
important whether you have kids or not. I mean, even if there are no kids in your home, you still need to be very dedicated about going in I like that terminology.
I didn't come up with that.
Oh,
I got to
it's a
go back
shame.
and
You
now I
should
got to
steal
go.
it.
Now I got to go retrace my steps the last week and figure out where
Yeah.
that came from.
Very
Or we'll
good.
just steal it and I'll just claim it myself, whatever.
Excellent.
All right. Anybody else? We have just a couple minutes left. I didn't want to take too much of your time tonight, but anybody else have anything they wanted to share? Good advice, bad advice, terrible advice?
Okay, I have a question actually.
Good.
Hello, this is Brent Dyer. So I have a question about something you just said, because Leah and I, we don't have any kids, and so it's easy for us. We go on a date every week, but we have found it really challenging. Like we go on dates and we're like sitting there and we're eating our food and we're like, I don't know what to say. Like,
Yeah.
I hate you all the time. You know what's going on in my life. So I find chat. So anyway, my question is, how do you do that practically? And like, how do you do that?
Great question, Brent.
Yeah.
Great. I think this is where people miss the boat. And I appreciate and respect that you guys already, even with no kids, are making the effort to get out and to be with each other and to focus on each other. And I think that's a very important first step and something that you should continue to prioritize, just like Jen was saying. But so there are plenty of ways to do this. Sometimes it comes organically because of what's been going on. And I think the part of it is going from the questions about what is going on in your life to
The logistics of life.
The logistics of life to how do I feel about what's going on in my life?
Right. One of the best questions you can ask each other is, when you're discussing the logistics, ask one another, and how did that make you feel? Go deeper into, what did I think? What did I feel about this happening or that happening? So yeah, using date night as a place to really dive more into the feelings of the logistics is a good thing to do.
I mean, one great tool is you can just sign on to Covenant Club and go look at the weekly challenges.
That's right. We are providing for you all a date night conversation. But I think another great thing to do, and this is something Matt and I have done a lot, is we use conversation starters. So sometimes it can be super hard to know, like you're saying, Brent, what do we talk about? I'm by nature the more talker. I know in this scenario, it always seems like Matt's the talker, but that's just because he's in charge right now. But when it comes to like on a more social level, he's a little bit more of the introvert, and I'm not. And so I'm by nature more of the talker, but there has been plenty of times on date night where it's felt like I'm doing all the talking and you're not doing the talking, and this is not working well. So we started using conversation starters because it's like this third party kind of providing a question that the two of us can then consider what our answer is for that. So a couple of sources for conversation starters. There's an app called the Ultimate Intimacy app, and it is a great app. You both get it on your phone. It has 1,000 different resources to use as a married couple, but one of the things that it has is a section, I think it's called Intimate Chat. No, wait, that's the talk between each other. It says conversation starters or something like that.
Yes.
Anyhow, it has a whole place where it's just got a list of ideas of things to ask one another and talk about. And some of our best conversations have come from, there it is.
Looks like
Good job, Brent. Some of our best conversations have come from using some kind of a resource that provides a conversation starter, because it will be a question that I would have never even thought to ask him. And so it spurs this deep conversation between us. And so Ultimate Intimacy app, I'm trying to think of like some other, Gottman has a card deck.
Yes.
The Gottman Institute has, just Google that and you'll find that.
I think it's also available as an app if you look for Gottman, Gottman, Gottman card deck
Mhm.
or card decks, something along those lines. That is an app that's available, and also phenomenal conversation starters there. So I
And
don't know,
who
Brent,
is it?
does that answer your question a little? At least kind of explain. That's our approach anyway.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any advice for Brent?
That's very helpful.
I was just gonna say the card deck is important because the phones are distracting on dates and detract from focused conversation.
Yes.
And
Yes. So actually, what Matt and I most use is a set of card decks that is no longer made, and so we hate it because we would most like to refer this, and they haven't made it in years and years.
Yeah.
But I agree. I keep them in a little pouch inside my purse, and then that way our phones are totally put away. So yeah, if you can get physical cards, that's even better. I'm going to look on my phone because there's somebody that just made a new set of cards, but I can't think of who it is. So keep talking and I'll figure this out.
Well, Ultimate Intimacy has cards you can buy. So we have some of those.
Yes, they just came out with actual physical cards, didn't they? You're right. Yeah.
We've used Ultimate Intimacy before. It was recommended to us by Jacob Holman.
Oh, perfect.
course.
Yes. Very good. Oh yeah,
There you
we've gotten
go.
those. So yes, that is a great.
And what's great, one of the things that's great about the Ultimate Intimacy card deck is that it is a variety of different topics or general themes. So
Mhm.
I think they have like, well, I can't now off the top of my head, I can't remember it, but they cover a wide range of topics to stimulate conversation about all different manner of aspects of your relationship.
Yeah.
So also, I think the Intimately Us app. So there's Ultimate Intimacy, and then there's Intimately Us. And so Jacob mentioned something about that on Covenant Club, and I actually like it better. And it also has the conversation starters. And there's some things in that app that are also really great for just discussing different aspects. It has like a whole, what's it called? It's called our Sexploration list, but it's not really all about sex. It's about emotional connection, spiritual connection, all that kind of stuff. And you can discuss where you match and where you don't match. That's what Jacob brought up, that's pretty awesome. Like that's a really neat tool.
Yes. Thank you for reminding me that is a great tool within that Intimately Us app as well. So definitely something to consider.
Yeah. All these people in groups using the word intimate. There's an example of the cards. Yeah. So there's like a $sign and a heart. All the symbols mean something different.
There's spiritual topics, financial topics, relational topics, sexual topics.
Yeah. Those are great.
And the nice thing about having a third party source like these cards or the apps or whatever is that it's non-threatening to both of you.
Mhm.
So it's not me coming to the conversation with an agenda
Mhm.
or feeling threatened because my spouse might be coming to the conversation with an agenda. Neither one of us is bringing up this topic. We're just going to talk about it. Right. And hopefully be able to do that in a way that's not already escalated by some of that anxiety.
And I was just going to say one more thing. I mean, we have found that sometimes one card spurs an entire date night conversation. Sure. You know, sometimes we're kind of just cycling through the cards. I'm sure our waiters and waitresses are always like, what are those people doing?
What game are they playing?
But there's a lot of times that one card just it kind of opens up places of conversation that you just didn't even know you didn't even know you could talk about. Yeah.
Or sometimes you're surprised by your spouse's response because it's different than the last time you talked to them about this.
Yes. That's the other good thing about using the same card deck and ours has like 1,000 cards in it or something. It's ridiculous, but it's taken us forever, but we're kind of starting to cycle back through some of the cards. And sometimes I remember his original answer and it's not the same now.
Right.
Because we probably had it for 6-7 years now.
At least, yeah. Easily so, 6 or 7 years.
Anyhow, something like that's a good tool.
All right, who wants to last word? Go ahead.
Once you start using those, I think there's other times we discuss things that we probably would have never discussed before, even when we don't have card decks or conversation starters and etc. So
yeah, it kind of trains you how to talk on a deeper level
Yes.
and be okay with talking about other things, Yeah, great point. Very good. All right. This was awesome, guys.
What do we think about the Zoom format? Is this more fun than
Liked it.
watching me lecture? Yeah, definitely. I thought so too. Especially especially with your feedback, because you guys have a whole
Yeah.
lot of great things to offer as well, and we appreciate you stepping in and being a part of the conversation.
Yeah.
Do we have a date for June yet?
Yes, we do. Hold on.
Can we just put it 9 a.m. instead of 9 p.m.?
That's right. It's 9 p.m. your time, isn't it?
I know. Well,
I could not do 9 p.m. So that's,
yeah. Well,
Um,
while she's looking that up, I mean, we've been doing this on Thursday nights because that's the most convenient for us, but that's not necessarily the only day of the week that we could do this. It probably would have to be on an evening unless we're doing it like on a Saturday morning or something, or a Friday morning, I suppose, but a lot of people work Fridays. Are there other days of the week or times that might be better for those of you that are participating?
So y'all would rather like 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, so that lines it up more with 8 your time zone, right? Instead of 9 p.m. Tim, is that?
No, he said.
Did you say a.m.?
Yeah, I said 9 a.m. Like
Gotcha.
I mean, mornings are like so good.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one.
I think 9 p.m. is good because then the kids are in bed typically.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was one reason we said like 8 Central Time, trying to kind of just, looking at who might be joining, getting kids in bed. But my brain cells start shutting off at 9 p.m. So I think we had said June 16th would be the next, if we're going to keep it on a Thursday evening. Because the 9th, I have an interview thing.
That's okay. So we'll say
the
the 16th for now. If we get some feedback that suggests another day that would be better, we're certainly open to that. So, but for now, we'll say it's going to be the 16th again at 8 p.m. Central Time starting. And we'll try to do Zoom again. I don't know that we have a topic nailed down yet, so we're also open to those suggestions as well.
Very good.
All right. Good to see you guys tonight. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for participating. We appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
Love you guys a lot. And
Thank you.